Hey everyone, Red here, and today will be quite different as there won't be any Dead by Daylight gameplay. I was asked on stream quite a bit if I would read some creepypasta to the community. I had the community send me numerous things to read and set the date for every other Sunday for a short stream dedicated to the creepypasta. It was a lot of fun as there was some great stories and some fun after reading chat with the community. So, today's video is just that. If you enjoy it, make sure to leave a like and, a comment stating you would like to see more. If you are here just purely for my Dead by Daylight content, I'd love to also know that from you, so let me know in the comment section down below. This is my first time doing anything like this, so I'm sure there'll be quite a few mistakes, so be gentle. Much love, everyone, and now make sure your lights are dimmed, you are relaxed, and you are ready for some creepypasta. Feel free to minimize this video and let it play in the background. Alright, let's get into it. I have a story to tell you, but I beg you not to read it. Please don't. I know it sounds stupid, but by the time you understand why, it will be too late. I know this will not deter many of you, but without this simple warning to ease my conscience, I may not be able to go through with this, and I desperately need to go through with this. Let me start at the beginning. I have an old friend, Joe, who I've known since grade school. I'm in my late 20s, so is he, and he's been my friend for at least half of that time. I'd say that we know each other pretty well after all that time. This may seem irrelevant and uninteresting, but I have to stress this. I know him, and I know him well. What he did was, it was nothing he ever could have done without some outside influence. On the night of Friday, January 23rd, I was driving to his apartment to pick him up and his roommate up. We made plans to go out, hit a couple bars, and generally have a good start to the weekend. When I arrived, there were a number of police cars and ambulance outside the complex. I was, of course, curious, as I, like many people, rarely see such sights. As I got closer, I noticed a body covered in a bag in the street, surrounded by glass and no more than a few feet from a badly dented car. I'm rather horrified, coming to the conclusion that someone was hit by a car and killed right outside the complex. As I finished gawking, I made my way inside and up the stairs to the third floor. That's where my friend's apartment is, and that's where I found it wasn't a simple accident. The police were upstairs as well, talking to residents and taping off one of the apartments. My friend's apartment. I panicked. I asked one of the officers what happened, why my friend's apartment was taped off. I told him I was supposed to be meeting them for drinks and asked if they were okay. The officer told me that it appeared that Joe had butchered his roommate with a kitchen knife and thrown himself through the plate glass sliding door into the street below. I was a ghost. Shaken so badly I could barely answer the simple questions the officer asked me upon finding that I knew the victims. My mind just couldn't process it. I knew him. He'd never do such an atrocity. It didn't make any sense. I made my way back to my car in silence and drove home as though on autopilot. I couldn't get the shock of it all out of my head. My wife asked me what happened and I explained it to her. She was shocked as well, but she didn't know him like I did. I told her I needed a bit of time and went to my room. She let me be. Lost, I found myself at my computer. I'm not really sure why I did it, but I found myself checking his email. I know the passwords he commonly used, so it was hardly an issue to find the right one. I thought perhaps he had friends online who I needed to tell, or maybe I thought I'd find a window into what caused this. I really don't know. If I knew then what I know now, I would have never done what I did. I scrolled through his inbox looking for familiar names. Joe and I and several friends kept in touch online, and I instantly recognized several of those names in the last few days. The most recently opened email was what looked like a spam email with an attachment and no other information. Curiosity got the better of me and I opened it up. The file itself was a picture, named nothing but a seemingly random string of numbers. It was simply a man, seemingly normal at a glance, but the longer I stared at it, the more disturbed I became. He stood, staring with a grin, sinister and unsettling, with eyes that were both vacant and focused at the same time. That terrible grin seemed to widen the longer I stared, and for minutes I was fixated at that horrible face, eyes burning as they stared back at me with equal intensity. Finally, I tore my gaze away to find the only other thing in the email. A single word, a word I cannot repeat, not yet. I need to tell my story. I couldn't take the sight of it anymore. I had to close it. The face was still looking at me. I swear I could still feel his grinning stare. As I went to log out of his email and put that horrid thing out of my mind, I noticed the time it arrived, January 23rd, 5:35 p.m. We were supposed to meet at 6. He likely saw this less than half an hour before he died. For the next several days, I tried to get it out of my mind. I attended my friend's funeral, I tried to go on with my life, but I kept feeling uneasy. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like someone was watching me. At night, I started to have unsettling nightmares. I couldn't remember much of them when I awoke, but they all had the same elements. That horrible, grinning man, blood, violence, and death. I couldn't get a good night's sleep. I was struggling at work. I kept feeling tense and on the edge. I needed to know what was going on. It was hard to really know what to look for at first. All I had to go on was that image and the single word that accompanied it. Grinning man is hardly a descriptive search, and haunted grinning man or cursed grinning man wasn't really any better. Still, I did what I could with my limited resources. I actually found a reference to it, or what I thought it was, on a website dedicated to conspiracies and paranormal things and other things I'd normally dismiss as utter bullshit. Still, this wasn't natural, and I was willing to try to open my mind to any explanation. Since this seemed to defy anything conventional, what I uncovered about this grinning man was that it was an image that seemed to circulate among image boards and forums a few years back. The article said the picture was harmless, if not a bit creepy, though I strongly disagree on them in a bit term. But it seemed that something about it, when coupled with a keyword that was unknown, could trigger extreme psychotic bouts, irritability, nightmares, and hallucinations. It seems so utterly stupid, simple text and pixels causing such harm, and yet I was sitting there, realizing that I was experiencing those same nightmares, irritability, and hallucinations. Joe obviously experienced the psychosis, evidenced by his sudden murder-suicide. I was stunned. I thought it had to be a joke, some kind of bizarre hoax, but I knew there was more to it than that. I knew what I was feeling, and I knew my friend. That picture and that word, it had to be the keyword. What triggers everything? Oh God. What is going to happen to me? Was I going to kill my wife and then myself? I started to panic, but my rational mind won over. If it was just paranoia and hallucinations, these couldn't hurt me, right? They only had power if I gave them power. I decided that I would end this, put it out of my mind, rationalize it away each time I felt it. That would be the end of it all. As much as my rational brain helped me through the day, it couldn't protect me at night. My dreams continued to degrade, ending in me waking in the middle of the night, cold sweats and heart pounding. I started taking sleeping pills, though I refused to tell my wife. I didn't want her to worry, though I knew she could tell something was wrong with me. The pills did nothing though. In fact, they seemed to make my dreams even more vivid. I remembered everything when I awoke, even every horrible, bloody detail, that grinning, inhuman face. I found I started sleepwalking. The first night I woke curled in the bathtub, then in the kitchen. 3 days later with a knife in my hand and the bloody remains of our black lab at my feet. I can't even remember the next things that happened after that. I know I cleaned up our dog, hid him in the trash bag, and said he ran off in the night and got lost. I was terrified. I had no idea what to do. I tried to medicate myself heavily. I locked up all the knives in the house. My wife knew there was something terribly wrong, but I refused to say anything. I don't even know if I could at the time. The only thing I can still remember clearly was the dreams. I was irate and easily spooked at the littlest of things. I thought it had to just be my nerves from all of this and lack of sleep, but I remember my friend, the website. I knew I was going to get worse. The thing I remember most about the dreams, aside from that horrible grinning man, is the emotions. I felt each death that was inflicted in a dream like it was real, like it was my own hand disemboweling my friends, my family, and random strangers against my own will. Like each death, each vision of terror he showed me was not just a vision, but my own work. Each horrible death in the dream made him grin a little wider. He wanted me to snap. He wanted me to become exactly what he was showing me. He wanted me to become him. So I come here to tell you this because I'm desperate. I need help. You see, I can't bear the thought of harming my wife, the woman I love most in this world, yet I know it's inevitable. He's always there, watching, grinning, knowing I'm close to breaking and nudging me over the edge. I know what he wants. I can't let him have it. I don't know any other way out. I'm reaching out to you in hopes that he'll leave me alone. Maybe if you, the careless reader who I warned away, will give him what he wants, he'll let me be. I have to try. I don't know what else to do. I'm so sorry. I hope you can forgive a man for acting in desperation. And that's the end. And that was The Grinning Man. Let me know what you thought of it down below. And now we can move into our next story, Falling. We've all felt it. You're up late, working, studying, watching a movie, reading on the computer. Doesn't matter what you're doing. It's the feeling you get. You're tired, your eyes burn, and you have gritty feeling you get after not sleeping for a while. Okay, you can't go crawl into bed right now, but close your eyes for a couple of minutes. Try to get a little moisture back into your eyes. That couldn't hurt anything, right? Then you're falling, like stepping off of a cliff. You're in free fall, though your body isn't even moving. Then, like a bungee cord snapping back, you're jerking awake, heart thumping a little faster, blinking quickly, wondering what just happened. Doctors call it a hypoagnotic jerk. I know I slaughtered that. A natural reaction, they say, to your brain thinking you're dying when your breathing and heart rate slows as you fall asleep. What the doctors don't know is your brain is right. Every time you let yourself nod off, every time you feel that falling sensation, you're not falling. You're being pulled down. And one day, your brain won't be able to pull you back up. They will have you. And that's actually it for this one, guys. It's a really short one. I won't go back to the cam for this because we'll move on to the next one. But really short, really simple, really sweet. Next one we have here is the Russian sleep experiment. Russian researchers in the late 1940s kept 5 people awake for 15 days using experimental gas based on stimulant. They were kept in a sealed environment to carefully monitor their oxygen intake so the gas didn't kill them, since it was toxic in high concentrations. This was before closed circuit cameras, so they only had microphones and 5-inch thick glass porthole sized windows into the chamber to monitor them. The chamber was stocked with books, cots to sleep on, but no bedding, running water and toilet, and even enough dried food to last all 5 for over a month. The test subjects were political prisoners deemed enemies of the state during World War II. Everything was fine for the first 5 days. The subjects hardly complained, having been promised falsely that they would be freed if they submitted to the test and did not sleep for 30 days. Their conversations and activities were monitored, and it was noted that they continued to talk about increasingly traumatic incidents in their past. And the general tone of their conversations took on a darker aspect after the 4-day mark. After 5 days, they started to complain about the circumstances and events that led them to where they were and started to demonstrate severe paranoia. They stopped talking to each other and began alternately whispering to the microphones and one-way mirrored portholes. Oddly, they all seemed to think they could win the trust of the experimenters by turning over their comrades, the other subjects in captivity, with them. At first, the researchers suspected this was an effect of the gas itself. After 9 days, the first of them started screaming. He ran the length of the chamber repeatedly, yelling at the top of his lungs for 3 hours straight. He continued attempting to scream, but was only able to produce occasional squeaks. The researchers postulated that he had physically torn his vocal cords. The most surprising thing about this behavior is how the other captives reacted to it, or rather, didn't react to it. They continued whispering to the microphones until the second of the captives started to scream. The 2 non-screaming captives took the books apart, smeared the page after page with their own feces, and pasted them calmly over the glass portholes. The screaming promptly stopped. So did the whispering to the microphones. After 3 more days, the researchers checked the microphones hourly to make sure they were working. Since they thought it impossible that no sound could be coming with 5 people inside, the oxygen consumption in the chamber indicated that all 5 must still be alive. In fact, it was the amount of oxygen 5 people would consume at a very heavy level of strenuous exercise. On the morning of the 14th day, the researchers did something they said they would not do to get a reaction from the captives. They used the intercom inside the chamber, hoping to provoke any response from the captives they were afraid were either dead or vegetables. They announced, "We are opening the chamber to test the microphones. Step away from the door and lie flat on the floor, or you will be shot. Compliance will earn you 1 way to immediate freedom." To their surprise, they heard a single phrase in a calm voice response, "We no longer want to be freed." Debate broke out among the researchers and the military forces funding the research. Unable to provoke any more response using the intercom, it was finally decided to open the chamber at midnight on the 15th day. The chamber was flushed with the stimulant gas and filled with fresh air, and immediately voices from the microphones began to object. 3 different voices began begging, as if pleading for the life of a loved ones, to turn the gas back on. The chamber was opened and soldiers sent in to retrieve the test subjects. They began to scream louder than ever, and so did the soldiers when they saw what was inside. 4 of the 5 subjects were still alive, although no one could rightly call the state that they were in life. The food rations past day 5 had not been so much as touched. There were chunks of meat from the dead test subjects' thighs, chest stuffed into the drain in the center of the chamber, blocking the drain and allowing 4 inches of water to accumulate on the floor. Precisely how much of the water on the floor was actually blood was never determined. All 4 surviving test subjects also had large portions of muscle and skin torn away from their bodies. The destruction of flesh and exposed bone on their fingertips indicated that the wounds were inflicted by hand, not with teeth as the researchers initially thought. Closer examination of the position and angles of the wounds indicated that most, if not all of them, were self-inflicted. The abdominal organs below the ribcage of all 4 test subjects had been removed. While the heart, lungs, and diaphragm remained in place, the skin and most of the muscles attached to the ribs had been ripped off, exposing the lungs through the ribcage. All the blood vessels and organs remained intact. They had just been taken out and laid on the floor, fanning out around the eviscerated but still living bodies of the subjects. Digestive tract of all 4 could be seen to be working, digesting food. It quickly became apparent that what they were digesting was their own flesh that they had ripped off and eaten over the course of the days. Most of the soldiers were Russian special operatives at the facility, but still many refused to return to the chamber to remove the test subjects. They continued to scream to be left in the chamber, and alternately begged and demanded that the gas should be turned back on, lest they fall asleep. To everyone's surprise, the test subjects put up a fierce fight in the process of being removed from the chamber. One of the Russian soldiers died from having his throat ripped out. Another was gravely injured by having his testicles ripped off and an artery in his leg severed by one of the subject's teeth. Another 5 of the soldiers lost their lives if you count the ones that committed suicide in the weeks following the incident. In the struggle, one of the 4 living subjects had his spleen ruptured and he bled out almost immediately. The medical researchers attempted to sedate him, but this proved impossible. He was injected with more than 10 times the human dose of morphine derivative and still fought like a cornered animal, breaking the ribs and arm of one doctor. When the heart was seen to beat for a full 2 minutes after he had bled out to the point where there was more air in his vascular system than blood. Even after it stopped, he continued to scream and flail for another 3 minutes, struggling to attack anyone in reach and just repeating the one word, more, over and over and weaker, till he finally fell silent. The surviving 3 test subjects were heavily restrained and moved to a medical facility, the 2 with intact vocal cords continuously begging for the gas, demanding to be kept awake. The most injured of the 3 was taken to the only surgical operating room that the facility had, in the process of preparing the subject to have his organs placed back within his body. It was found that he was effectively immune to the sedative that they had given him to prepare him for the surgery. He fought furiously against his restraints when the anesthetic gas was brought out to put him under. He managed to tear most of the way through a 4-inch wide leather strap on one wrist, even though the weight of a 200-pound soldier was holding that wrist as well. It took only a little more anesthetic than normal to put him under, and the instant his eyelids fluttered and closed, his heart stopped. In the autopsy of the test subject that died on the operating table, it was found that his blood had tripled the normal level of oxygen. His muscles that were still attached to his skeleton were badly torn, and he had been broken 9 bones in his struggle to not be subdued. Most of them were from the force his own muscles had exerted on them. The second survivor had been the first of the group of 5 to start screaming. His vocal cords destroyed, he was unable to beg or object to surgery, and he only reacted by shaking his head violently in disapproval when the anesthetic gas was brought near him. He shook his head yes when someone suggested reluctantly they try the surgery without anesthetic, and did not react for the entire 6-hour procedure of replacing his abdominal organs and attempting to cover them with what remained of his skin. The surgeon presiding stated repeatedly that it should be medically possible for the patient to still be alive. One terrified nurse assisting the surgery stated that she had seen the patient's mouth curl into a smile several times whenever his eyes met hers. When the surgery ended, the subject looked at the surgeon and began to wheeze loudly, attempting to talk while struggling. Assuming this must be something of a drastic importance, the surgeon had a pen and pad fetched so the patient could write his message. It was simple: keep cutting. The other 2 test subjects were given the same surgery, both without anesthetic as well. Although they had to be injected with a paralytic for the duration of the operation, the surgeon found it impossible to perform the operation while the patients laughed continuously. Once paralyzed, the subjects could only follow the attending researchers with their eyes. The paralytic cleared their system in an abnormally short period of time, and they were soon trying to escape their bonds. The moment they could speak, they were again asking for the stimulant gas. The researchers tried asking why they had injured themselves, why they had ripped out their own guts, and why they wanted to be given that gas again. Only one response was given: I must remain awake. All 3 subjects' restraints were reinforced and they were placed back into the chamber, awaiting determination as to what should be done with them. The researchers, facing the wrath of their military benefactors for having failed the stated goals of their project, considered euthanizing the surviving subjects. The commanding officer, a former KGB agent, instead saw potential and wanted to see what would happen if they were put back on the gas. The researchers strongly objected, but were overruled. In preparation for being sealed in the chamber again, the subjects were connected to an EEG monitor and had their restraints padded for long-term confinement. To everyone's surprise, all three stopped struggling the moment it was let slip that they were going back on the gas. It was obvious at this point that all three were putting up a great struggle to stay awake. One of the subjects that could speak was humming loudly and continuously. The mute subject was straining his leg against the leather bonds with all of his might. First left, then right, then left again for something to focus on. The remaining subject was holding his head off the pillow and blinking rapidly. Having been the first to be wired for EEG, most of the researchers were monitoring his brainwaves in surprise. They were normal most of the time, but sometimes flatlined inexplicably. It looked as if they were repeatedly suffering from brain death before returning to normal. As they focused on paper scrolling out of the brainwave monitor, only one nurse saw his eyes slip shut at the same moment his head hit the pillow. His brainwaves immediately changed to that of a deep sleep, then flatlined for the last time as his heart simultaneously stopped. The only remaining subject that could speak started screaming to be sealed in now. His brainwaves showed the same flatlines as one who had just died from falling asleep. The commander gave the order to seal the chamber with both subjects inside, as well as 3 researchers. One of the named 3 immediately drew his gun and shot the commander point blank between the eyes, then turned the gun on the mute subject and blew his brain out as well. He pointed his gun at the remaining subject, still restrained to a bed, as the remaining members of the medical and research team fled the room. "I won't be locked in here with these things, not with you," he screamed at the man strapped to the table. "What are you?" he deemed. "I must know." The subject smiled. "Have you forgotten so easily?" the subject asked. "We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralyze when you go to the nocturnal haven where we cannot tread." The researcher paused, then aimed at the subject's heart and fired. The EEG flatlined as the subject weakened, choked out, so nearly free. And that is it. All right. This one, of course, is no sleep, and it's just an urban legend at an elementary school called the Head Cutter. The Head Cutter. That's what they called him. I always thought it was a little on the nose, even as a child. Then again, it was also children who named him, so maybe I shouldn't have expected anything more. The Head Cutter was one of those urban legends that everyone had a story about. A story that didn't happen to them, but definitely happened to their mom's friend's cousin's son, so it was undeniable. The story behind him was as follows. He was a tall, sickly thin man with a piercing laugh. You would always know when he was coming because you'd start hearing that cackle echo from the streets away, getting closer as he would around each suburban house. That and the rumble of the engine. He supposedly drove one of those ride-on lawnmowers. He'd sit on top, laughing hysterically, the engine going like some sort of grotesque backup singer. Now, you might be guessing that he uses the lawnmower to do the titular head cutting. That wasn't the case. It was never actually specified how he cut people's heads off, and the lawnmower didn't seem to serve any purpose in his descriptions other than being sinisterly bizarre. What was specified, however, was what he would do with the heads. The head cutter was said to have a doll, a wonderfully intricate doll that had taken years to craft. Its porcelain face was painted so it would be lifelike. It practically moved. He treasured that doll for whatever reason. The reasons always changed depending on who was retelling the story. Sometimes the doll was crafted to look like a child he had lost. Other times it was a gift from his dying mother. And yet other times it had been his only friend in a lonely and isolated life. Regardless, one day the doll was broken. Its delicate face shattered, destroying the illusion of life it once held. And with that illusion, any sanity in the head cutter had left was shattered as well. He tried to no avail to replace the doll's head. He searched far and wide for an artist that could recreate the convincing detail the porcelain had once held. Each artist fell short. As he grew more desperate, he turned to darker methods. The head cutter killed his neighbor, decapitating her and attaching her head to the doll's body. At first, he thought he had done it. Human heads don't keep well, however, and before long he realized he'd have to find a new head for the doll once again. From that day on, he stalked the streets of suburbia looking for the perfect new doll head. Yeah, pretty dark stuff. Especially for a bunch of elementary school kids to be telling to each other. I had always been something of a scaredy cat. The first time I heard this story, I started crying and later told my mom about the frightful tale. Never one for sentimentality, she laughed. A deep, hearty, comforting laugh that was nothing like the maniacal cackle described in the story. Well, that doesn't even make any sense. He rides a lawnmower? Someone cruising around these neighborhoods on a goddamn lawnmower would never fly under the radar. The HOA won't even let us park in a red car in the driveway. Nobody's stalking children with a lawnmower and going unnoticed. Your friends might as well have said he comes by on an elephant. At least that would have been interesting. Her amused rejection was effective in calming my nerves, and my cries slowly turned into sniffles. There's no head cutter? I asked, hopeful. Of course there's no head cutter, she replied. I wiped a sleeve across my wet face. If my mom thought it was ridiculous, it must be ridiculous. I reasoned, after all, she was a grown-up and grown-ups knew everything. Still, even though I know, rationally, that the story had been deemed far-fetched, it lingered in the back of my mind. I had been in the habit of sleeping with my drapes partially open. There seemed a little risk in my second-story bedroom, and I liked watching the stars and the moon shift into view as I dozed off. After I heard the tale, though, I would make sure they were pulled tight every night. My mind had convinced me that I'd wake up to a mechanical whirring one night, that I'd go to the window to investigate and lock eyes with the head cutter himself as he cruised by looking for victims. My short walk from the bus to my house went from pleasant to anxiety-inducing too. Any sound of a car, power tool, or other engine would send my heart jumping, my eyes frantically scanning the monochrome suburban streets. Previously, I'd been proud that my mother had trusted me to walk home alone, even if the reason was based more on her work schedule than confidence in my maturity. Now, I found myself wanting to ask if she would meet up at the bus stop. Maybe out of pride, I didn't want her to think I was a baby, and maybe out of knowing her answer would be no anyways. Instead, I'd exit the bus, carefully composed, and begin walking as quickly toward my house as I could. I never ran. For some reason, I thought that if the head cutter was out there, running would only draw attention to my status as a scared and alone child. I kept my head up, trying to look how I imagine an adult would walk. A futile exercise for a third grader, but one that distracted me from my anxiety at least. And slowly, as I completed the walk home over and over, with every growling engine explained by a passing car or a neighbor doing yard work, my confidence began to become real. My mom was right. I began to believe, not just on a rational level, but also emotionally. It was just a silly story. I watched Penelope, the next door neighbor, write another complaint about the man across the street. His trash can was too close to the curb or too far, or something like that. I wasn't really paying attention. If a few inches of trash can positioning couldn't go unnoticed, a man laughing maniacally while riding a lawnmower around definitely wouldn't. My growing confidence was shattered when Layla Thompson went missing, a bubbly, extroverted third grader. I hadn't known Layla well, but I had known of her. She had been playing in her front yard in broad daylight. Her mother was the overprotective sort and usually kept an eagle's eye on Layla. That day, she had forgotten cookies in the oven. She rushed inside to save them, probably figuring that Layla would be fine, bouncing her pink ball in the driveway for a few minutes. When she returned, the ball was rolling to a stop in the center of the cul-de-sac. Layla was nowhere to be seen. It didn't take long for police to be called and a frantic search to start. By the time Monday rolled around, rumors were flying. Teachers tried their best to stifle any hearsay, but talk still spread on the playground. By the end of the day, I had heard at least 5 variations of what had definitely incontestably happened to Layla. They ranged from the generic "a kidnapper promised her free candy" to the more far-fetched "she ran away to join a gang of fellow children who wanted to be free from adults." However, a frontrunner in this series was quickly emerging. The head cutter had struck again. His daughter looked just like Layla, you know. That's why he took her. James, a 5th grader, told my friend Jesse, and I with great authority. By Tuesday, this seemed accepted as the gospel, despite the lack of any verifying reports. My old anxiety rushed back in with these new events. I found myself once again jumping at a sputtering car engine, once again having to force myself to not race for my front door. This time, though, my concerns seemed shared by my mother, at least in part. She sat me down after school one day. "Now, I know you already know about stranger danger, but it's extra important you remember not to go anywhere with anyone while you're walking home. You're to walk from the bus to the door, no going to your friends, not even stopping by the park, at least until this blows over. It's better to be cautious, do you understand?" I nodded with my eyes wide open. "I understand," I hesitated. "Do you think the head cutter took her?" The head cutter isn't real. But other people are, okay? Sometimes scariest people aren't the boogeyman. Sometimes they can just look like you and me, and that's why it's important you do what I just told you," she replied. I said I understood again, but remained quietly convinced of the head cutter's existence. A day turned into a week, and a week turned into a month, and still no trace of Layla was ever found. The search parties dwindled to just her parents and some family friends, and police cars stopped driving by. Even with all my fears, I found myself becoming a little more lax on my walk home each day. Then it happened. It was a sunny Tuesday afternoon, blisteringly sunny. I was walking a little more slowly than usual, not wanting to exert myself more in the already stuffy weather. Still, I was only 2 driveways from my house when I heard it. A steady, mechanical growling emanating from a street ahead of myself and perpendicular to my house. "It's just a car, or a neighbor trimming their bushes," I reassured myself. Then it was interrupted by a tiny, off-kilter laugh. The blood drained from my face, and I felt cold wash over me despite the oppressive sun. The growling was growing closer. It sounded like it was coming towards my street. Second, equally bone-chilling laugh broke me from my frozen state. I took off running for my front door. The couple 100 feet I had never felt so far as I raced down the sidewalk. Earlier concerns about drawing attention to myself gone. Any rational thought was gone. Actually, I just knew I needed to get out of here. Time seemed to move in a slow motion as I reached my door. Pulling my key around my neck, I felt the air was suddenly made up of syrup as I tried to slip it into the keyhole. Another laugh echoed behind me, definitely closer. I didn't dare turn around and look. Instead, ripping the key from the door and shoving it as soon as I heard the lock slide from its place, I practically fell onto the tile entryway. I slammed the door shut behind me. I sat there for a moment, back against the door, then realized I hadn't locked it. I reached up and slid the deadbolt back into place, then scrambled against the hallway wall. I felt some relief that my mom had closed all the drapes before leaving for work. I sat there, back against the wall, hyperventilating as I tried to process what was happening. Outside, the whirring grew louder. It had to be on my street by now, and I said a silent prayer that it would continue down the street without passing my house. Thankfully, my prayer seemed to be answered, as the noise began to grow fainter. There was another laugh, this time barely audible over the fading whirring. Was this real? This couldn't be real, I thought, and suddenly found myself rising. I don't know what was going through my head, but I felt that I had to peek out the window. I had to prove to myself that it wasn't real, that it was just a local teenager trying to scare the kids or a neighbor trimming their trees. It couldn't be real. I crept to the window, slowly shifting the curtain to the side just enough to see the road outside. At first, it looked empty. Then towards the end, movement caught my eye. He was real. I saw him, clear as day, just like the stories described, tall and far too skinny, sitting on top of a lawnmower that was currently turning the corner. I slammed the curtain shut, sinking to the ground. My mother found me still sitting on the ground, a mess of tears and snot, when she got home. Her worry was replaced with subtle annoyance when I told her I'd seen the head cutter, but she still tried her best to comfort me. She insisted he wasn't real, that I must have just seen one of the neighbors. I knew what I had seen though. The head cutter was real. After my mother had refused to believe me, I was hesitant to tell anyone else what I had seen. Jessie noticed I was quieter than usual the next day though. "What's wrong? Are you sick?" she asked, eyes widening at the potential of me getting her sick too. "You need to tell me if you're sick so we don't share juice boxes later. My mom says that's how you get sick." I shook my head. "I'm not sick. It's nothing." "I don't believe you," Jessie said. I sighed, looking around for anyone who might be listening. Jessie was my best friend. Surely she would be warned about what I had seen. "All right, but you have to promise not to laugh at me." "Is it a secret?" I paused. Was it a secret? Maybe the other kids should know what I had seen, so they know he was lurking out there. Then again, maybe they just laugh it off as my mom had. And they all already knew the story anyway, so it's not like it was new information. Still an actual sighting. They would know where to avoid then. "I guess not," I finally said. I took a deep breath. "I saw him." "Him?" I lowered my voice to a barely audible whisper, chills creeping down my neck as I said the name out loud. "The head cutter." Jessie gasped. "No way." I did. I was walking home from school and I started hearing the lawnmower and his laugh, just like the story said. "What did you do?" "I ran to my house. I thought he was going to see me, but I got inside just in time. Then I went and looked out the window. I just saw him turning the corner, but it was really him." "Whoa, he could have gotten you." I started at the thought. She seemed to be taking me seriously, at least. I know, my mom doesn't believe me, though. Why not? Her mom always had believed her, or in hindsight, at least she thinks she did. "I don't know, I was worried you wouldn't either." Somehow, by the time afternoon recess rolled around, practically everyone was talking about my sighting. 3 separate kids, none who I've ever spoken to before, came up to ask me about my encounter. The next day, the fuss had spread. My mom was waiting for me at the bus stop when I got off. An unusual sight. "So, I just got a call from one of your teachers. You've been telling kids you saw the head cutter?" she asked as we walked towards the house. I nodded, nervously wondering if I was in trouble. "Look, I know you think you saw him, but he's just a silly legend someone made up. There is no head cutter, alright? I know Layla going missing has been scary, but that doesn't mean a scary story is real. But Mom, I saw him on the lawnmower." I did some digging. Mr. Johnson down the street said he has a ride-on lawnmower, and he said you can come over and see for yourself. I was thinking we could head over there right now and put this whole business behind us, my mom offered as I frowned. Mr. Johnson was a short, round man who prided himself on doing things himself. It wasn't surprising that he would have bought a lawnmower himself instead of hiring people to take care of his yard. HOA be damned, but I doubted he was the person I'd seen. Still, my mom seemed pleased with her solution, and not wanting to let her down, I nodded. "Great." We walked down the street and then around 2 corners before finally arriving at Mr. Johnson's house. He was sitting outside on the previously mentioned lawnmower. My heart sunk when I saw him. There was no way this is what I had seen. It was all wrong. His height, his silhouette, even the color of his lawnmower, green and gray instead of black. Still not wanting to get in trouble with my mom, I decided I would go just along with it. Mr. Johnson gave an exaggerated wave as we approached. "Well, hi there." "Hi," I said, hoping my quietness would come off as shyness. I wanted to get this over with. I had not decided that my mom wasn't going to understand, and it was best that I just figured out how to handle this myself. "I heard you might have seen this lawnmower the other day and gotten a bit spooked, eh?" "I guess so." Well, I can promise you the only thing this lawnmower cuts is my grass. And really evenly at that too. He let out a laugh. It was nothing like the tiny, frantic laugh I'd heard yesterday. Yes, there was no way this was what I had seen. So look, it might sound scary, but there's nothing to be afraid of. You can even come sit on it for yourself, he offered. I took him up on the offer and forced a smile and what I'd hoped looked like relief. My mom seemed satisfied that the whole thing was behind us as we walked back to our house that afternoon. I didn't correct her. The week drew on and there was still no sign of Layla. By the time following Wednesday rolled by, talk about my sighting had died down too, replaced by Kyle's parents buying him his own dirt bike for their summer camping trip. He hadn't stopped talking about it once. I had to admit, that sounded pretty cool. I couldn't imagine my mom buying me an actual vehicle. Even a normal bike was pushing it. I was walking home Thursday, watching the bus disappear, thinking about the cool dirt bike tricks I could totally personally do if I just had one, despite my lack of experience. Then I heard another familiar whirring sound. Again, my heart dropped. Just like last Tuesday, it seemed to be coming from around the corner, not the direction of Mr. Johnson's house by any means. The ear-splitting laugh echoed through the air. This time, I was still at the end of the road from my house. My heart pounded against my chest as I considered my options. Run for the house. The corner was only 2 driveways down. If I didn't make it, he'd seen me for sure and be only 100 feet or so from me. Turn and run the other direction. I was in the middle of his street. The corner was definitely a few minutes run away. I decided I'd race towards my house. I took off, running for all I was worth. Legs pumping as I passed 1 driveway, 2 driveways. My house was growing closer. The whirring waves was too. 3 driveways. I could see the details of the lock on my door now. 4 driveways. 2 to go. And then the worst nightmare became real. I saw the shadow enter the streets moments before he did. Time seemed to slow as the bony, too-tall man rode onto the street. A wide and sinister smile plastered across his face. His smile grew even wider, almost impossibly wide, when he saw me. He let out an overjoyed laugh, and then another, and another. As he yanked the steering wheel of the lawnmower to the left, it turned towards me. He turned towards me, gaining on me faster than I thought was possible. To my credit, I didn't stop running. The door was less than 50 feet from me now, and then a bony hand grabbed my shoulder. I wasn't sure how he'd caught up to me so quickly, how he maneuvered his ride so smoothly. The hand yanked me roughly back and I stumbled, and then everything went black. When I woke up, I was in a small, dark room. It was almost entirely empty, save for a single overhead light. Outside, I heard a raspy, sing-songy voice. "I'll find your head." That's what I said. "I'll find your head, bring you back from the dead." The voice repeated this disturbing rhyme over and over for what seemed like forever. Finally, it stopped. The light shut off at the same time. I sat there in the sudden dark silence, shaking as the full extent of my situation dawned on me. That's when I noticed something glittering in the door frame. When the light had been on, it wasn't visible. The dim rays of light slipping under the door, however, reflected off of it. Curious, I stood up, walking closer to see what it was. I had to get mere inches from the door before I could make out what it was, and when I did, my eyes widened. It was a sparkly metal beret, the kind you would buy in bulk at Claire's or Target. More importantly, it had been wedged in the lock of the door, imperceptible from the outside, and just barely visible from the inside. It had prevented the door from locking. I realized this was possibly my only chance to escape this situation, at least with my head. I held my breath as I listened intensely for any movement outside. There was nothing. Slowly, I placed a hand on the doorknob. Still no noise outside. I pulled the door open to see a relatively normal-looking basement. Dust-covered rows of plastic storage crates. A bike leaned against one wall. If it wasn't for the heavy door I just opened, it would look like any family basement. Trying my best to remain quiet, I pulled the door shut behind me and began walking through the row of shelves. The stairs had to be around here somewhere, I figured. As I walked, a dim ray of sunlight caught my eye. It peeked through the rows of shelves, landing on the floor at my feet. There must be a window, I thought. I changed my directions, instead climbing through one row of shelves to head towards the light source. I stood up in the next row and froze. The facade of normal basement didn't continue in this row. Instead, shelf after shelf was lined with human skulls. There had to be at least 24, all pristine and white. I felt bile rise in my throat. You have to keep going. Something urged me. I nodded and took a step towards the row of skulls, forcing down the vomit in my mouth and trying to remember to breathe. I pushed one of the skulls aside and crawled into the next aisle. There. The window was about 5 feet off the ground, with a desk covering and dusty tools sitting just below it. With the boost from my desk, I was confident I could make it. I was pulling myself onto the desk when I heard a scream behind me, a raspy, infuriated scream followed by rapid footsteps. My heart leapt out of my chest as I struggled to pull myself up there more quickly. I stood up on the table. It shook as I did so, obviously not used to either use or this much weight. The windows was just within reach. I grasped the lock, pulling with all I was worth. My fingers slipped once, the footsteps grew closer. The second time they didn't slip and the window opened with a blast of dust. I grabbed the window seal, trying to pull myself up. I almost had when I felt my foot slip. 3 things seemed to happen at once. I felt a jolt as I plummeted behind the desk. Searing pain filled my face as something cold slammed into it, and a silhouette appeared in the aisle behind me. Running on adrenaline now, I pulled myself from behind the desk as quickly as I could manage. Something hot and sticky was running down my face as I turned to see the headcutter man himself. He froze as he caught sight of me. I raised a hand to my head. When I brought it down, it was covered in blood. "Ruined," he spat. "Ruined," he yelled, slamming a fist to the nearby shelf. It shook. I didn't wait for him to make a move. Instead, I turned and jumped for the window seal, this time managing to pull myself halfway through it and knock the wind out of myself. At the same time, the frame pressed into my ribcage. I expected to feel a bony hand wrap around my ankle at any moment. I wriggled through the window, no doubt scraping my stomach and legs as I did so. The cold grass never came, and in another moment, I felt cool grass beneath me. I rolled over. The headcutter stood just below the window, motionless. He stared with 2 cold eyes as I scrambled backwards, but never made a move to come grab me. "Oh," his raspy voice said. I didn't have to be told twice. I gathered myself to my feet and raced through the empty streets. Once I felt like I was far enough from that dreadful house, I knocked on a door. A young man holding a baby answered. His face went pale when he saw me, and he quickly shouted for his wife, ushering me inside. They called the police, who called my mother. The police were eventually able to find the house based on the description I had given of my escape route. It was empty when they did, though. The owner was an elderly woman who passed away years before. It had officially sat vacant ever since. They never found the man who kidnapped me, and they presumed also taken Layla. I ended up needing several stitches for the gash going down the side of my face. When I was in high school, my mother offered to let me try laser scar removal. I turned her offer down. As long as I had that scar, I was ruined in his mind, and I was glad to be considered as such. It felt like a safety net in that way. Not something that had ruined me, but something that had saved me. That wasn't all that had saved me, though. They never did find Layla, but her mother confirmed that the beret wedged into the door had been hers. I'm still eternally grateful to her. If not for her quick thinking, I wouldn't be here telling this story today. So if you live in a drab suburban neighborhood and hear whirring, followed by a tiny laugh, walk a little faster, lock your doors when you get home, pick your kids up from the bus stop. It's probably just Mr. Johnson out doing lawn work. But I wouldn't risk it. Not now that I know he's still out there, looking for that perfect head. And that is it for today's stories. I hope you enjoyed them. We will be back with some more DBD videos starting tomorrow. And this was an incredibly fun stream with a lot of fun chat after the story time. I hope you all have a great night. And remember to never look behind you when you're walking up those dark stairs or down your long hallway, as you never know what's waiting to look back. Much love, and as always, I'm Red, and I'm signing off.